Robert E. Lee, leading general of the Confederacy, Pickett, the other names. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible motivation can there be for this? Who is telling you to?
Senator King.
Mr. Secretary, I'm somewhat puzzled. I grew up in Virginia where Robert E. Lee was revered. I think when I was a kid, his birthday was a school holiday. But as I grew older and learned more about American history, I learned that he fit the classic definition of a traitor. He took up arms against his country. He broke his oath as a member of the United States Army, which he took upon entering his career at West Point. Why are you going through these incredible gymnastics, finding current soldiers or other soldiers to rename? And you slipped a minute ago. You said we're returning these bases to their original names. Robert E. Lee, leading general of the Confederacy, Pickett, the other names. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible motivation can there be for this? Who is telling you to do this? Who is urging you to do this?
Senator, the veterans and service members across the country who have deployed from Fort Bragg or Fort Benning or Fort Hood or Fort Pickett, there's a legacy, there's a connection to those bases and to those places, to what they trained for there, what they did for, and what they came home back to. That matters to them. Ask enough of them, as I do all the time, before and later. And we recognize the service of those who were put into the replacement. No one's disputing that. I would never dispute that. What we're looking at is erasing history, erasing names, erasing base names that service members are tied to.
Talk
to people that serve
history,
at Bragg. Ask people that serve at Fort Bragg or Fort Benning if they like the fact that the names have been returned. And to a man and to a woman, they will tell you, thank God we're back to Fort Bragg, and thank God we're back. And thankfully, because so many men and women in this country have served, there's a Benning and a Bragg and a Pickett and a Hood has a Silver Star or a Medal of Honor that we could rename the base to because of the limits of what Congress allowed us to do. So this is something we've been proud to do, something that's important for the morale of the Army, and those communities appreciate that we've returned it back to what it was instead of trying to play this game of erasing names.
We're not erasing history, Mr. Secretary. We're recognizing history and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery. And to continue the practice of recognizing those people and honoring them by the naming of these bases is, I believe, an insult to the people of the United States. Let me talk about the budget. I don't understand why the budget is coming to us in two pieces. Why not give us an honest base budget instead of putting a piece of it in reconciliation? As I understand it, OMB is saying we're going to have a flat defense budget for the next 4 or 5 years. Are we planning reconciliation every year from now on? Why not give us an honest budget telling us what your priorities are, and then we can consider it. This committee always works in a bipartisan basis on a defense budget. We all want to see some increases in the defense budget, and yet you're giving us this this fake, here's a piece of the budget, here's another. You're cutting in the base budget, you're cutting shipbuilding in half and saying, well, we're going to make it up in reconciliation. Are we going to have reconciliation every year, which basically, by the way, puts a significant part, 10 or 15% of the defense budget in a wholly partisan decision-making process, whereas in the history of this committee, it's always been bipartisan. Why are we doing it this way?
Senator, from our view, the budget number 961 meets the requirements and threats that we face. And
that's not the number. The number is 892.6. You're adding reconciliation. That's my whole point. Why not give us a base budget of 961 or whatever the right number is, what you consider the right number, and then we can operate and make our decisions. Why do it in this bifurcated way that really is fooling the American people about what the defense budget is?
We're not trying to fool anybody, sir. It's 2 bills, 1 budget. We're working with OMB, and we feel very comfortable with the number of 961 billion.
Why don't you give us a straight-up budget for the Defense Department? That's my question.
Senator, this is a straight-up budget for the Defense Department. It's a 13% increase over what Joe Biden gave us.
It is a two-part defense budget. Part of it is in reconciliation instead of in the budget that's being presented to this committee. This committee only has a partial review of the budget. I don't understand why we can't have an honest, straightforward budget instead of this son of Oko that you're putting over on us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In the solemn air of the Senate hearing room, Senator Angus King's voice broke through the formality with something rare in Washington: moral conviction. His words were not rehearsed sound bites or partisan barbs. They were the questions of a man confronting a nation's conscience. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. It was direct, stripped of pretense, cutting through layers of political rhetoric like a scalpel through fog. King spoke of his own past, a boy raised in Virginia, taught to revere Robert E. Lee as a hero. As a child, he celebrated Lee's birthday. As an adult, he learned the truth. The man he once admired had betrayed his country. He had taken an oath to defend the United States, then turned his sword against it. King's voice did not tremble with anger, but with the weight of that realization, the weight of what it means to tell the truth about one's own history. Before him, the official defended the decision to return or retain Confederate names on military bases. He spoke of heritage, of connections, of soldiers who had served under those banners and returned home proud of those names. He warned against erasing history. He claimed that the renaming efforts were political, unnecessary, divisive. But King's response was not just an argument. It was a reckoning. "We're not erasing history," he said. "We're recognizing history, and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery." In that instant, the discussion shifted from policy to principle. The hearing became something deeper, a confrontation between two visions of America, one that clings to nostalgia for the symbols of rebellion and one that insists on moral clarity, even when it hurts. The question of names is not about paint on a sign or letters carved into stone. It's about the moral compass of a nation. It's about what stories we choose to tell our children, what heroes we decide to honor, and whose pain we are willing to ignore in the name of tradition. Senator King's words reminded everyone watching that history is not a static museum. It's alive, and it demands accountability. To honor those who fought against the United States, who fought to preserve human bondage, is not heritage. It is hypocrisy. He wasn't questioning the service of soldiers stationed at Fort Bragg or Fort Benning. He was questioning the moral logic of venerating men who fought to destroy the country those soldiers swore to protect. In that sense, King's question, "Why are you doing this?" became a mirror reflecting the deeper contradictions of American identity. Because this is not just about Confederate generals. It's about power, about how nations decide who deserves glory and who deserves silence, about how the myths of history become shields to protect the guilty from the truth. And when the conversation turned to the defense budget, the theme of accountability did not fade. It evolved. King demanded honesty. "Why not give us an honest base budget?" he asked. "Why not tell the American people the real number?" He exposed the sleight of hand that so often defines Washington, a budget divided into two parts, designed to obscure rather than inform, to manipulate rather than reveal. The exchange, tense and deliberate, showed how deception takes many forms. Sometimes it's a name on a base, sometimes it's a number on a page. In both cases, the cost is the same: public trust. What King was defending, in truth, was not just fiscal transparency or symbolic justice, but the integrity of democracy itself, a system that depends on citizens who can see clearly and leaders who tell the truth. When that clarity is lost, when comfort replaces conscience, democracy begins to decay. His words carried a quiet warning. America cannot afford to sanitize its history or disguise its priorities. To do either is to trade courage for convenience. And every time we allow falsehood to masquerade as tradition, we betray the very idea of the United States. When Senator King asks, "Who is telling you to do this?" it's more than a question about bureaucratic orders. It's a challenge to the culture of denial that has haunted this country for generations. Why, in a democracy born from rebellion against tyranny, do we still honor those who fought to enslave? Why, in a government accountable to its people, do we hide the truth about our spending, our wars, our values? The exchange between King and the defense official captures the very heart of America's ongoing moral struggle. Between myth and truth, between nostalgia and progress, between comfort and courage. To rename a base is not to erase history, it is to write it honestly. To publish an honest budget is not to weaken national defense, it is to strengthen public trust. These are not radical acts, they are the basic duties of a republic that calls itself free. King's composure, his refusal to yield to political gamesmanship, reminds us that leadership is not about volume. It's about vision. It's about standing in a room where power and denial intersect and daring to say what everyone else is afraid to. This is wrong. The hearing may have ended, but the question lingers. It echoes beyond the marble walls and microphones, out into the living rooms of every American who still believes this country can live up to its promise. Why are we doing this? That question, stripped of politics, is a moral test. It's the kind of question that built movements, toppled lies, and defined the arc of justice in this nation's history. And once it's asked, it cannot be unheard. The story of America has always been written in these moments, when truth challenges tradition, when conscience confronts convenience. Senator King's words remind us that patriotism is not blind allegiance to symbols of the past, but fidelity to the ideals that must guide the future. The hearing ends, the cameras dim, and the sound fades. But the truth remains. The names we choose, the budgets we defend, the history we tell, they all declare who we are. And the time for pretending is over. This is liberal freedom. Stand for truth, speak for justice, and never stop asking the question that keeps democracy alive. Why are we doing this?